Hi, everyone. Harry here to talk about a trial currently ongoing in San Francisco before Judge Charles Breyer, happens to be the brother of Justice Steve Breyer, over the Trump administration's use of National Guard and even some military forces in their whole kind of roundups of ostensible illegal aliens. So you remember they decided to just flood the zone with including troops, and the California governor, Gavin Newsom, said, no, thank you. We're doing fine on our own. You're freaking everybody out. Also, when you federalize our guard, the National Guard in California, that means they can't take care of other things like the real climate issues that are coming and the like. And thanks, but no thanks. And Trump, nevertheless, they stormed in, and it was very sort of high profile. And we're talking about, military people in camouflage fatigue and big guns and boots and masks and the like confronting, and in many cases, anecdotally anyway, violating the rights of the people who were at the place they were invading, were the federal troops who they suspected, but it doesn't appear to be with any kind of good reason in many cases, were illegals. They, maybe it had to do with skin color or the lack of facility in English, just things that would not distinguish between a legally residing person and an illegal. And that's been a whole nother lawsuit now pending. But Breyer at the time said, this doesn't work. You have made a finding to try to make it work, that there's a sort of an emergency and an insurrection. I don't find that that's credible at all. And I'm putting a stay on your action and saying you can't send them in any longer. The Ninth Circuit reversed that stay from Breyer, and it said, no, you can go, we are going to remove that prohibition, and the National Guard can be federalized, and the military can have some limited role there. And that's the state of legal play now. However, the thousands of people that the Fed sent in have now winnowed their way to 250, and it's all fairly quiet, but they're still relying on the issue, which matters because even though the Ninth Circuit said we're taking away the stay, remember, stays are always temporary. They involve extraordinary findings about who's likely to win and where the irreparable injury might lie. So the Ninth Circuit tells Breyer you can't have the stay, but the issue still remains, and that's the issue that's being tried. And there's a few things going on, but basically it is this. We have a very strong principle in this country. It's enshrined in a law known as the Posse Comitatus Act, and it basically says the military has no role in domestic law enforcement. That's for other authoritarian countries. That's, Tiananmen Square with the troops on the street confronting protesters, not in the US of A. And it's the act itself, and then just even a pre-existing, almost kind of constitutional principle dating way back that this is not how it works in a democracy. Except when it does, because there are very few circumscribed exceptions. And this has been Trump using again and again, like no other president in history. He wants essentially to declare an emergency wherever he sees it, but especially in blue states. And he go in as the strong man who alone can clean things up. So even though the stay by Breyer was removed, the issue remains, did the federal government violate the statute, the Posse Comitatus Act, which says you can't do law enforcement unless there's some really extenuating circumstances, a real insurrection, or, really a crisis. And part of what's going on there is what were things like on the street, at least as Breyer interprets Posse Comitatus law, and were they asked or not, everything that happened in this kind of conflagration that was completely caused by the feds. So there's going to be 3 days of testimony, and the main witness yesterday at this trial was a senior Customs and Border Patrol official. This is, by the way, it's the state that is suing and saying you violated Posse Comitatus. So this Customs and Border Patrol official, Scott Sherman, who was the command of Guard troops, he testified basically, yeah, really, I didn't think there was much cause for it. I didn't really see a lot of crisis on the streets, etc. So, I was against it. And then there were a couple other witnesses, and it's the same. They are trying to get at whether or not the deploy, I think it was some 4,000 troops, were really justified under the law because the president found, but did he legitimately find? That's a whole legal issue in the case that may matter as it goes up what degree of deference. What the Ninth Circuit said in reversing what Breyer said in entering the injunction was, it's to the courts to decide if it's an emergency or an insurrection. What the Ninth Circuit said is, well, yeah, but you got to really defer. That's what they came up with, even though it's not foreign policy. It's not, it's the use of federal troops in localities, and there's no such thing as a general police power. There is, it's really up to the states and localities. In other words, you could have found a different sort of presumption. But the Ninth Circuit here basically has said you got to really defer to the president, even if the judges make the call. So what we've had so far in the first of 3 days, and we'll continue to cover this, are witnesses who have, given the court real reason to say, this is a totally overblown situation and you did not have what you needed to, and therefore you violated the Posse Comitatus Act. Now, when you have this kind of authority, typically you need to just be playing an ancillary role, protecting federal property and the like, so that will also be part of it. What were they actually doing on the ground? Okay. I think this is quite connected, at least politically, to what Trump is now doing in D.C., which is also hotly opposed by the local leaders. But he all of a sudden has tried to put some of the National Guard there under his direct control, or the control of Bondi, and also to send out troops to protect federal property. There's just no sign it's needed. Crime is down in D.C. by 30% and even more in 2025. And really, if you take a sort of objective view, is this emergency he's proclaiming accurate? I think he loses. But the question will be whether you take that view or you give him some deference, because the statute says if he declares an emergency. And so it seems to incorporate, the sense that it's just up to him. But in all these things, we have a lying president who will call an emergency, whatever is in his interest to call one. And so the question for the courts will be, do you defer to that or not? But here's what he says about Washington, which has record low violent crime. It's a filthy, crime-ridden embarrassment and a rat-infested, graffiti-infested shithole. That's his equivalent of saying emergency, and it seems to have come to his mind because somebody he knew was in a carjacking and he heard from, Laura Loomer, whatever. That's the kind of nature of fact-finding that's going on here. So what's going to matter in D.C., he's made clear, is a sort of precursor to trying to go into other cities, maybe with a sort of roving force that I talked about in another YouTube, What's going to matter really when push comes to shove is whether the courts are going to let him do what he wants because he's the president. Though, again, nothing specifically presidential or constitutional role of the president in a local crime situation. A huge emergency because the country's burning, maybe. But that's not what these laws were created to do. But will the courts permit him to basically say, Chicago's burning, LA's burning? He won't say New Orleans is burning. That's a red state. And I'm coming in and I'm going to really crack some skulls. And won't the MAGA base kind of love that? That's what he wants to do. And typically these laws are written assuming the good faith of the executive, as do the courts, meaning that they won't be doing it just for political purpose and without regard to the fact of the matter. We have a president for whom that presumption is exactly wrong. And so we'll have to see whether the courts will give him running room to be wrong on this sort of general executive power notion that you need an executive with sort of extra built-in deference for when actual emergencies come, unlike these phony baloney ones that he's using for political camouflage. So that's the issue that comes up. We will follow this trial and what Breyer says about Posse Comitatus Act over the next couple days, and also see what the DC initiative that he at least proclaims will expand to all kinds of other mainly blue cities in the country will actually come to. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.